Hi everyone. Today I'm talking to Renata Žakauskė, a software developer and team leader. After working as a psychiatrist for over 5 years, Renata successfully switched to front-end development and team leadership. In our conversation, we discussed Renata's perspectives on software developers' well-being, leadership, and career development. I'm really glad that we had this conversation, as Renata is one of the few mental health professionals that understands what it's like to be a software developer and can also provide a less abstract and more nuanced understanding of software developers' experience. Please note that this conversation was recorded during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, very close to Lithuania, where we currently live. For this reason, it is a strange time to talk about happiness and well-being. As one of my clients said, I find it difficult to talk about my future life when other people's lives are at stake. At the same time, I realized that happiness comes not only from positive emotion, satisfaction, and security, but also meaning, growth, and service. So I hope that our conversation will encourage you to pause and ask yourself, how do I actually feel? What does this all mean? And what I want to do about it. As a final note, please make sure to support Ukraine and their country. Our Ukrainian brothers and sisters really need it. You can find relevant links in the description below. And now let's move to the conversation. So we have been talking with Renata like for about 5 minutes. I just noticed that I wasn't recording, so that's strange. But Renata had an opportunity to turn on her notification. So basically what we were discussing is the elephant in the room, that a war is happening almost next to Lithuanian border. And you discussed that as a team lead, you had to face certain stressful situations before war. And it's just one of the stressful situations that you're, as a colleague and team lead, are facing right now. And from what you discussed, it seems that you're just trying to provide support as usual. So I understand that. And I mean, okay, so that would be strange to start reacting somehow differently. But what I'm interested in is, like, maybe in terms of examples, did you notice like certain changes in how people are communicating and how they are working, maybe in their performance, maybe in their productivity after this thing happened? Because I feel that there are certain trends that we might discover. And I feel that you, as someone who's like in the trenches or working as a developer and a team lead, I'm sure that you notice certain things. So what comes to your mind when thinking about these maybe small or not small changes after this thing started?
Mm-hmm. I think what everyone also noticed, that it's much more difficult to focus on your work, on your daily tasks, and just all these thoughts about the war comes to your mind, and we feel the urge to check what's new, maybe something has changed, and to read the news once again, and much more often than we were used to do.
Are you talking about that like on Slack or face-to-face about those news, or you're just keeping that to yourself in terms of your team?
We don't communicate about the news with our team, but usually if I have some colleagues around me, so we talk about it.
Okay, so that
I would say that the communication, we use Teams, so let's say on Teams, it's more professional, unless we call one-to-one, we have one-on-one calls, or we meet in person with our colleagues, then it's easier to talk.
Okay, I see that.
It feels less formal.
So in terms of your team experience, your people are more willing to open up when you're like physically next to each other, or maybe you're on a Teams call. Okay, got it. And I'm just curious maybe to hear your opinion. So there are like two competing opinions about the news. One point of the continuum says read less, focus on very good sources, don't overread, take care of your mental needs. And this is the how to say, the part of the continuum that I feel that I was rooting for, or at least representing. But I realized that for many people, it's very difficult not to read, not to follow on those news. It became like even a habit, although I feel that it a little bit lowered after like 3 weeks passed in the war, but still people are keep reading it, and they read in the morning, they read in during work, they read before sleep, and some people say that, okay, so that's great, you are just trying to reduce anxiety by, how to say, getting a proper input of information that makes you feel somewhat safer, because you realize that, okay, the war is not happening in Lithuania, I know where it's going, and I can feel more safer. So where do you stand on that continuum, where on the one hand is don't read anything or read less, and on the other hand, read everything and try to keep up to date? Where do you land on that?
Lately, I try to limit the information. So I try to stay with one source or two sources, and to get this information at once. Let's say in the evening, I watch the news, I get the information, and I try not to spend more time reading, because it feels that I get the same information. Okay, the war is going on. They moved 1 kilometer further, and still the war is going on. So it feels that there is too much details, and these details don't change the feelings and the situation in total.
Okay, so on the whole, you feel that because the war becoming slower and is not like that fast as maybe the Russian government expected it to be, but nevertheless, I mean, we have to give the devils its due. There's a, how to say, an opinion that because people are being killed like next to our border, and some people feel that you have to read and you have to follow and somewhat maybe mourn or grieve, or even express anger about that. And because even though, okay, it's a small difference, but for some people, they try to empathize and they feel that, okay, for those people, it's a big catastrophe every day. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is how to balance like your, how to say, personal need to care for yourself and maybe read less, but balance it with like a proper attitude towards the climate, proper reaction. And I feel that there's some answer in between, but what would you recommend to people who are, let's say, are torn apart between these two like extremes?
What I feel that reading and getting the news, it's some kind of the way how to get involved into this war process. So you cannot change the situation and go to join their army, but you can keep staying close to them by reading. So that's one of the way how they continue being close. But what I am thinking that being close to these news and getting these news again and again doesn't help. It doesn't help the people who are there in Ukraine. So I'm trying to focus more what I can do. Maybe I can donate something. Maybe I can initiate some, let's say at work, we started talking, how can we support Ukraine? And we donated our team building budget for their organizations which support Ukraine.
Amazing.
So it was very nice that I just asked if it's possible, and all the other teams also started talking that we are willing to do this. And well, it feels that it was better to spend my time talking with my colleagues how we can donate the money instead of reading.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So in a sense, if you allow me to summarize, for some people, reading is like somewhat self-deceptive, because by reading they feel that they are doing something, but it's not like providing any benefit. Okay, that makes sense. What about those people who are like fighting those LinkedIn wars or Facebook wars and trying to challenge maybe some propagandish opinions, and they feel that this is their contribution? And again, people have different opinions about that, because some people might think that, okay, you're being patriotic, you're contributing, you're fighting those trolls. Okay, that's great. But the other opinion is that you are firing up those trolls, and you're even more increasing the amount of spread of that information. Maybe not the best information. So where do you land on this? Let's say if people, they are, let's say, at least me, I'm thinking, okay, so should I participate in these wars because I'm somewhat antagonistic? I feel maybe some need, but then I think, is there any point? Will it help, or it can even harm something? So what's your take on that?
In my opinion, we should think about the balance and the effect which about the result which can be when we start fighting these wars. Because I understand that the propaganda in Russia works very good, and they have their background already. They have been doing this for years, and it's very difficult to change the whole situation. Well, just to update this whole situation. And I remember very good one thought that our professor psychiatrist told me, and he was telling about some news in psychiatry and how everything is changing, and he was talking to a colleague who was older than he, and he said that, well, that's total different situation and total different view now, how we see psychiatry and some of the mental illnesses. And how come you don't understand our new view? And this older psychiatrist said that, well, that's the theory which I believed, and I worked on it for the whole of my life. And now at the end of my life, to say that it turns out that everything I've done before was wrong, that's just depressing. And it's very difficult from the inside to accept that everything you have believed on is not true. So I guess the same is in Russia, when the propaganda makes you the whole nice picture, and then someone from LinkedIn writes you and says, no, that's wrong. Well, it shocks, but you don't accept this message.
Okay.
You just become angry that someone is.
Okay, so I got it. So basically, if your goal as someone who participates in those LinkedIn wars is to provoke anger, that's great. But it doesn't necessarily, at least from a mental health perspective, encouraging that proper effect that you might expect, maybe to change the person's opinion, because the person just becomes defensive. And it seems that creates that negative loop or cycle where people are just participating, but it's not providing any benefit, of course. I mean, it's interesting. I think that there are a lot of examples where it works and people start maybe rethinking their perspectives, but it depends on how long they were attached to that ideology or perspective. So it's like also a hit or miss situation. Okay,
And
interesting.
also I would say that it depends what is the relationship between the people. If well, who they communicate to on LinkedIn, let's say, if they are quite close friends, close colleagues, they had their connection before, it's easier to start the conversation and to see each other's views. But if they don't know each other very well, only very, very little, so then the result might be not as you expect.
And it's once again another difficult topic where people maybe in work, maybe on Slack, maybe on Teams, maybe in corporate meetings, or maybe on that LinkedIn itself, they notice that their friend or colleague has a different perspective than you do. And maybe and it also creates like somewhat a shock. So why are you not being that patriotic? Why not are you participating? Why you are not funding? And it also creates a strange situation where before you felt safe that you know everyone, but you realize that you don't know them that well. And I guess it also creates different feelings and insecurities in people. And this is why, I mean, these fights, they become somewhat strange, because so what exactly you're fighting with? Your friends, your colleagues, or you're fighting like ideas? I mean, sorry for maybe a rant, but again, what I think in these situations is that there's little people in these conversations and a lot of ideology. And this is also, I guess, the most difficult part, to realize that a lot of people, they just, it's very difficult to detach yourself from something you believed like your whole life. And I guess this is like, yeah, what I'm taking from what you shared. And okay, speaking of LinkedIn, so another topic I'm interested in as well, I hope you too. So a lot of job search right now also happens on LinkedIn. And not job search, it's strange because software developers, maybe more senior ones, they don't search for a job. They just open up their LinkedIn and they choose from the 20 messages the one that seems the most user friendly to them, the most informative, the most interesting one. And I guess I will just ask you this question before we dig deeper. So as someone who is like already like 1 or 2 years in software engineering, how do you see this dynamic between software engineers and recruiters? What's your opinion on them? What can we learn from this dynamic? And maybe there are certain lessons that can be learned both for recruiters and both for software engineers in this recruitment thing that became even more difficult right now when there's a lot of anxiety in the room.
Well, the situation is, I guess, very quite intense, because it seems that the need for software developers is very high, and there is not enough people who can well, who can do the job, who can come to the company, who can join the company. So then what I see that you get a lot of messages from the recruiters that they are looking and they are willing to invite you and to talk about this, about the positions. But I feel a little bit overwhelmed with all of these messages I get. And as I'm quite new in this field, IT field, I raise questions if it has been like this before, or it started since I joined IT field. And on one hand, it's quite convenient because you get many options to choose the work, to choose the project. And if you find your current position not the best fit for you, so you can just move along, and you can find the new one. But on the other hand, it also, well, it's quite, I guess for some people, it's nice to keep the safe and known environment and the workplace. So changing the jobs often can be quite stressful.
True.
And then when you get so many invitations, you start thinking then, oh, probably I should change the work, but I don't want to change everything. And it can be a stressful situation as well.
Okay. So do you, okay, so how to phrase it properly? So the problem, at least the way I see it, because I don't do recruiting anymore, but I did like for 5 years or so as a freelance IT recruiter. So to answer your question, the problem was already somewhat big, at least here in Lithuania, but I'm sure that in Europe as well, before COVID. But COVID was, I guess, the first crisis that increased that insecurity for some people. And maybe if before people were more motivated, maybe to take the first offer if they like, it seems, I mean, maybe you will correct me, but it seems that right now people, at least what I take from talking to recruiters, it seems that they became more picky and they started to, okay, so I got one offer, maybe I will get the second one and the third one, and then I choose, and still I might not take it. So I noticed that people keep going to interviews, they keep talking, still maybe a bit reserved like they used to, but nevertheless, at the end of the cycle, recruitment cycle, they feel like, okay, maybe I'm not ready. And so COVID was like the first problem. And now it seems that it's even greater, maybe. I think it's difficult to compare the beginning of COVID with the beginning of war. But it seems that insecurity got back. And I feel, at least from talking to people in counseling sessions, for some people, it's too much. So, okay, there was COVID and now there's war. And it seems that sticking to your job is like the safest haven you can have right now, because at least some stability provides in your situation. But nevertheless, maybe you have been planning to change the work. Maybe you've been planning to learn some new technology, to work on some new project, raise your salary, because maybe you're thinking that, okay, so the inflation might become bigger in the coming years. So I should maybe change my job to increase my salary, to increase my safety, because salary is also what provides you security. So again, people, it seems they find themselves in a strange situation where on the one hand, they want to stick to the safe environment, their colleagues they know, the job they know, the project they know. But at the same time, they think that, okay, but what about my future plans? And as previously a psychiatrist, now a software developer, team leader, what would you recommend to these people who find themselves in these like torn apart situations?
Well, it's a difficult question. And I guess the answers can differ a lot among different people, because for some, well, probably what my recommendation could be that we still have to think about our goals and our values. What is the most important for us at that moment, at that period? And sometimes having something stable and safe, as it can be your workplace, it can help to reduce the stress.
Yeah.
So it might be one of the options. For others, it can be not too much stress to change their work, to face new challenges, and to accept them, and to feel motivated by facing these challenges. So I guess that despite the fact that war is close to us, but still our life is going on, and we have to continue uh, what to continue our activities as we talked in the very beginning, which we haven't recorded. We have to continue with our activities, with our work tasks, with our hobbies, with our family plans. It's still here around us, so we should try to move away from the stressful thoughts about the whole situation in the world, and to keep focusing on these our everyday topics.
Okay, so yeah, I totally get you. And I mean, if let's say if we assume that the future will be more or less like today, okay, so there will be some wars, but maybe because we're in NATO, we are safe. We might feel that okay, I can, despite that stress, I can try to follow my dreams, follow my goals, try to achieve them, and try to increase my well-being. Okay, I get it. But for some people, they are in a place where they thinking about atomic war or nuclear disasters, and they think, oh, so how can I learn a new technology right now, or focus on something, or think about buying property, or finding a partner when these things happening? And for some people, there's a thing that it might happen like tomorrow, that a bomb will be how to say, an atomic war will start like in days. And of course there's a recommendation, no, 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 it's just propaganda, don't believe that, feel safe, no one will do that, it would be a disaster. But nevertheless, even if you accept cognitively, or like with your brain or rationality, that it's logical what they are saying, the feeling says that no, 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 it's dangerous, do something about it. And that tendency to over catastrophize, I'm not saying that catastrophizing or imagining the worst scenario is bad, it can help to prepare, but nevertheless it can work as a drawback. So, and I feel that for some software developers who are, how to say, more tuned into their rationality and less into their feelings, at least this is what I notice, they might struggle to realize that their objective rationality decision making is affected by their emotions. Okay, so in these situations, then, so who to trust? So you feel that, okay, I'm doing a rational thing, but actually you're not doing a rational thing, you're just catastrophizing. So as someone who I think studied cognitive behavioral therapy, and that really is effective for identifying such cognitive mistakes. So what would you help to these people first, to how to deal with these difficult scenarios that they imagine, so dealing with them, but also how to use one's rationality to one's benefit, not to one's drawback, because the fact that they can rationally somewhat predict the future by calculating different variables, that's a strength. So how to use that strength, but not too much. What do you think, Renata? Sorry, my
Well,
questions are like
I guess
essays.
that's
So
very broad question.
I understand. But what
And the
comes to your
answer
mind?
can be very broad. But when what first comes to my mind, that well, we have to keep this thought further, and we have to accept it and analyze it.
Okay.
So if we feel scared, let's start thinking, what is that we feel scared about? And for different people, it might be a little bit different situations, or totally different situations. So when we reach this very core, what we are scared about, or what provokes our anxiety, then we can apply our rational mind and to start thinking if that's really if we should be scared of that now, right now, in this moment.
Okay, so can I interrupt you for a second? So let's say, okay, I'm afraid of nuclear war, but really, there's a risk that I'm afraid of. And at my core, I think this is like the worst fear I have. And I think that other people might have as well. So what should I do? So, okay, I identify that I fear that nuclear war, nuclear disaster. I fear for the well-being of my family, my parents, my children. So when I identify this in my mind, what could be the next step? So you can analyze me. I'm fine. Maybe it will be useful to our people. Okay.
Well, I remember very good one lecture. I studied cognitive behavioral therapy for a couple of years, and we had one lecture when we discussed how to deal with fears. And I saw a very good example how when you present the fear and then you keep going with this thought, okay, the atomic war starts.
Okay.
And the atomic bomb explodes.
Yes.
What's next? And and you dig into yourself and you search what's next, how you imagine this.
Okay, so let's stop here. Okay, so I'm
step.
trying to imagine it, and what I'm imagining is like the whole plethora of dystopian films I watched on that, and I imagine myself like with very bad clothes, with a lot of hunger, a lot of thirst, trying to orient myself in a very dangerous city that is toxic, and there are a lot of people with guns trying to steal my whatever I have at that moment. And I imagine myself trying to survive, but it seems like a very grim picture. And and I had the fear that I will not be able to survive in such a situation, that I will not be capable. But I'm also thinking that maybe I'm underestimating myself. So if, let's say, a client shares something like that, so how you can approach that? I mean, just spontaneously. I understand that you're not doing such work, but I guess maybe it's an exercise that people can do with themselves.
Well, I guess this view which you presented, which are your thoughts about this situation, it could be common to other people. Other people could have something like this. And I guess what else we could do, we could continue. Okay, you are in the city which is affected of this atomic bomb, and you don't have water, you are not safe. So what do you do next? What happens next?
Oh, I mean, it's not funny, but I'm sure that suicide would be on the table. But the question is, how would I do that? Because I feel that I wouldn't have a gun. I'm not that badass to have a gun, but if I had, maybe I would use it. But maybe I would use it to defend myself. So I'm not sure. But yeah, the picture is grim. What also came to my mind that, okay, so maybe it would be in here bad, but maybe somewhere else it would be better. So maybe I would be able somehow to plan how to arrive at that spot and maybe get shelter, maybe get food. So yeah, I mean, in all those movies and in actual situations, when we read history, we notice that people can be great survivalists if situation requires that. So I realized that, like, mentally, but nevertheless, imagining that situation seems awful, especially when you're used to a somewhat comforting life. So I totally understand that for many people, even to imagine such situation can provoke maybe suicidal thoughts, maybe the idea that I would not like to live in such a future. So when people, let's say, arrive at such a place, dark place, what could be done? What do you think?
I guess if the feelings are very strong and it becomes too difficult to be with those feelings, probably it would be quite a good option to search for someone who could help us to share these feelings with and to talk about these situations, because when you were talking about this future possible scenario, you said that, okay, one other option is that you some suicidal thoughts, but maybe you could try to find the shelter.
Yeah.
So there are two options. And then you can keep exploring your vision. And okay, so if you, let's say you commit a suicide, what's next? What happens next?
I mean,
If you
if
try to
I'm
find the shelter, what happens next?
okay,
You are there.
got
What
it.
happens next? And it turns out that, of course, it's very difficult. It's very scary, but still everything is moving further. So after a while of analyzing these visions, you get, probably you somehow burn out
Yeah.
a little bit. And also you just realize that despite those difficult moments, everything is still going on.
Okay. Okay, and this makes sense, because when you are actually allowing yourself to imagine that situation, not like in an abstract way, but you are actually trying to imagine what's the circumstance, where are you actually in, what is going on, your brain starts to problem solve already. Because when it's an abstract picture, you may seem helpless, but when you're actually trying to put yourself in that situation, your brain starts to problem solve. And of course, you might start thinking about bad solutions, like, let's say, taking your life, but you also might start thinking about how to save your life. So yeah, and of course, many people are in relationships, they have families, and this is, I think, also a strong motivator to keep going oftentimes. And I guess that's also should be included in the formula. So if I understand you correctly, this is like an exercise that someone could do, let's say, alone. But if, let's say, the feelings are too overwhelming, they should go to a professional.
Well, they could go to a friend first, if
Okay.
or a professional, if they feel that that's the right way, I would say. And one more thing about thinking about these worrying thoughts, worrying situations. It can be helpful not to think about them, but to write them down.
Yeah.
When you write your thoughts down, it becomes something, well, you can read it, you can touch it somehow,
Yes.
and you process it differently.
Yes.
So you are not just keep on repeating the same thoughts. So that's easier to move forward.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, the writing thing is also interesting, because a lot of developers, at least what I notice, usually if they are writing something or taking notes, and I think it's relevant for many people as well, including me, they are writing their notes on the computer or on their phone. And I'm not like up to date on the research, but at least what I understand is that these are two different writing processes, and they engage somewhat different brain centers when you write by hand or when you write on a keyboard. And I oftentimes, if clients are open to that, I urge them to write by hand, although I understand that's somewhat old-fashioned. But I think that it can also allow you to escape maybe bad negative loops that are you used to by writing on keyboard, because this is what you do all the day. But when you take a different means of writing, it can provoke maybe also different ideas. So let's say if some tool is not working, speaking abstractly, try a different tool. So I think for those people who are skeptical of writing, I think they should try writing by hand. What do you think? Can be a alternative?
I think that's very good point, because writing helps not only because you write down your thoughts, but also because you start doing some physical movements.
Exactly, yeah. Oh, you're
So
doing a physical movement on keyboard in a way.
only fingers. So it's different. For a person to write, they have to activate the different different parts of your brain,
Brain, yes.
and it helps you to deactivate the parts which are responsible for the emotions. So
Interesting.
that's why it's also
Yeah.
helpful. And what's more, that it doesn't matter where you write. You can write on a receipt. You can write on some nice paper, or
Yeah,
it can be just a paper already with
exactly.
some information in it. So start writing
Mm,
in that moment, and don't try to make everything perfect, to write in the nice notebook or with nice
mm,
color pen. It doesn't matter. The most important is writing and your
mm.
thoughts.
Great. Great. Okay, so great. So we discussed certain things, what can maybe developers or people in general do to reduce their anxiety and maybe use their logical thinking properly, not for catastrophizing, but for actually imagining real scenarios and their possible solutions, how they would go about those scenarios. I think that's great. And we started from job search, started from finding work, and so let's switch a bit. Let's talk from the business perspective. So for a developer, okay, so the person has a lot of choice, a lot of options. Okay, let's say they go about their anxiety and they do something about it. That's great. So individual well-being, check mark. What about businesses? So businesses, at least when I stopped doing recruitment, it was like uh, last summer, I think, of the last year. Already it was hot. So I noticed new companies coming in, and I will be honest with you, I never said that on air, but I always felt that I should tell those companies, at least those who would maybe talk to me. I say, guys, don't expand in Lithuania. Forget this part. There's no place already. COVID changed the rules. People are now choosing not only from Lithuanian based companies, they're choosing from basically the whole Europe or even the whole world. They're working remotely. It's becoming even more popular. So it's becoming difficult to expand your tech team. And the problem is, like in other industries as well, there's a lot of like lack of not talented people, but amount of talented people. And I imagine that for HR people, let's say, who are also okay, they can be somewhat emotional. I mean, I am as a HR person, I understand that I'm a somewhat a sensitive soul, so to speak. And I realized that okay, so if I'm HR, I'm working in a tech company in a HR department, and I have to close, let's say, how to say, find 20 or 30 engineers in a year. And now this things happens, and I have to somehow attract people, and I'm let's say I'm getting responses they are getting on the calls, but eventually a lot of them just withdraw or do not accept the offer. So as someone who's also participated in these situations, who hired people, who tested their knowledge, what would be your recommendation to the business part in this difficult, strange time? Maybe how they should engage software developers to maybe make them safer, allow them maybe to take better leaps, take those risks. Is there anything that business people or HR people could do? What do you think?
Uh, I'm thinking that what could be done from the business perspective. So keeping the good climate in
Mm,
the company, the friendly relationship, and also responsive to the employees' needs, it helps to maintain the employees. And also, this view of the company helps to attract newcomers.
How so?
So
How so?
I guess there are feedbacks written in the internet, and also what I see that the best way to find new employees is through recommendations.
Yeah.
So if some of your employees feel good working here, they will invite their friend, their colleagues, someone they like to join the company. It 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 might be helpful.
Yeah.
So that's one of the ideas.
Okay.
The other idea is well, if it's possible, to expand your borders. You don't have to search only in Lithuania. Let's say now what I see that there are many options when Ukrainians are looking for work.
Sure.
And it's a very good place when we can find some good employees there, because they used to work in the IT field there maybe. So maybe there is just some we need some help to help them learn something what is needed in our company. But if we invest, we will get the result back.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense, and I think that this is like opportunity for some companies to it will sound awful, but to use the crisis to their benefit in a way by accepting talent that maybe is moving to Lithuania. Although I feel that most of the Ukrainians are in Poland right now, those who are refugees. But I noticed that, of course, we are also expecting in our country, and we provide opportunities. I also noticed that people from Belarus who don't want to be taking into the army, they don't want to participate in the war, they are also leaving the country. And yeah, so there's also, I think, an opportunity. At the same time, I'm just thinking, so the reason why companies would expand in Lithuania, because for, let's be honest, for good and less expensive talent. But that good and less expensive talent is becoming expensive and expensive through years. So one thing is not helpful anymore. Juniors are their appetite is also becoming higher. They are starting to expect bigger salaries. Let's say an engineer who has, let's say, 2 years of experience in full stack development, or 2-3 years, the person might already expect, let's say, netto 2.5 thousand euros, maybe up to 3,000 euros, because then person understands one's place in the market and the person can negotiate that. And it puts companies in a difficult situation because you cannot save costs no more. And also it's really difficult to maintain these people and reduce attrition, because if, let's say, the person gets a bigger opportunity, better opportunity, that person will leave. So yeah, so there are a lot of business problems. Maybe they are out of the scope of our conversation, but nevertheless, from a mental health perspective, I mean, at the end of the day, these people make a decision after a conversation, or 2 conversations, or 3 conversations. And in these conversations, at least it seems to me, they are not the most honest ones. Oftentimes, people are not the most honest with HRs. HR is not the most honest with people. Let's be, I mean, it's difficult to be honest, because you don't want to demotivate someone. You don't want to disclose all the problems. But in my view, you should tell everything as honest as possible, both benefits and drawbacks. But nevertheless, there's a lot of like lack of disclosure. And I think this is one problem that should be overcome. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. And maybe you have any ideas what could be done, maybe more on the part of the HR or maybe a team leader, to increase that honesty, to increase that transparency, and to therefore to increase safety. I mean, what's your take on that? Once again, a grant. Sorry.
Lately, I was participating in workshop about conducting interviews, and I got some very nice thoughts from this workshop. And I liked the thought about being transparent when conducting the interview, that when you present the drawbacks, for you, it might seem like a drawback.
Exactly.
And you think that you don't want to mention because, well, it's not going to be anything good about it. But for someone else, it can be a challenge they want to face.
So, for example, could you give me an example of a drawback that can be perceived as a challenge by a developer, let's say?
Well, just everyday challenges. Let's see, the position is for the team lead and the developer. So you have to work at the project, and also you have a team lead responsibilities.
Okay.
So sometimes there might be situation when something burns in your team, and also the project crashes.
Okay.
At once.
I mean, it happens right now if you're collaborating with, let's say, you have been collaborating with Ukraine on a project, like Ukrainian developers and let's say Lithuanian developers, and now the project stops because there's half of the team cannot work on that project. So it's like actual situation. Okay, so you feel that might be for an HR person, it might seem as a drawback, but you think that for some people, it might seem as an opportunity or a challenge to use their abilities and learn something from that. Okay, but what if it will be perceived as a drawback? And I think it's a reasonable question for HR. So what to say and what not to say. And I mean, after talking to a person for an hour or two, I think it's still difficult to judge, okay, so will this person see it as a good thing or bad thing? So, I mean, interviews are strange to me because you're trying to, let's say, choose something on a very limited amount of information. So I'm still trying to figure out, so what can we do to improve this problem? And it seems that there's a lot of dated solutions to a quite modern industry. It seems that a lot of recruiting in IT happens using very old methods that are not working anymore. I mean, but I'm still not understanding where exactly is the problem, you know, why people still participate. They go through the whole steps, but then decline the offer. I mean,
well, what I see that shared responsibility, this phrase, is that the HR can be honest and present the drawbacks without his or her own fears, just facts, and then the candidate decides by themselves. Candidates decide by themselves if that is the challenge they want to face. And sometimes probably will be the situation when the candidate feels that, well, this is a drawback, I don't want to face such situations. And it's better to say for the candidate at the interviewing process that I don't want it. Well, that's not my goal. Then to meet such situation when work already has started and the candidate is employed, and then leave the work after some months.
So what I'm taking from you, Renata, what are you saying is that shared responsibility, both parties have to be open as much as possible. And it seems that many developers, they are saving information. They don't want to look bad, maybe they don't want to disclose too much. And they decide that, okay, maybe I see this as a red flag, but I'll pursue through the process. I will see how it goes. I also noticed that for some developers, interviewing in itself is a challenge. And if they decide to explore the market, they think, okay, so I'll just practice my interviewing skills. And also, I understand them from individual perspective. That's somewhat reasonable and pragmatic thinking, but is it ethical? I mean, if you're expecting the HR person to be open and expecting to disclose the information, or not information, the facts, and allow to the person to decide, is it like a drawback or is it a benefit? But the person then also has to be open on the one hand. On the other hand, the problem is that oftentimes HRs are very sensitive. And if they pick the slightest red flag, which is usually an assumption, they just hear the person saying, like, I remember a situation, I talked to a candidate and he said, oh yeah, this company might be a good adventure. And then I asked, so what do you mean by adventure? Does it mean that you will stay for 2 months and leave? Oh, no, it won't happen. But in my situation, and this was actually my mistake, because I picked on that, but to say the relationship, I didn't challenge the person further. And guess what happened after 2 and 3 months? The adventure stopped. And the candidate that I submitted to the client that was hired, the candidate left the company. So what I'm saying is that HRs, both parties are trying to increase their negotiation situation, to improve their negotiation situation. And they're trying to save information, which it seems doesn't help one party, doesn't help the other party, but disclosing too much, it seems that it's not also is not helpful, because usually the candidate who wins is the one who is the strongest one competence wise, who is the strongest one personality wise, and who says as little red flags as possible. But once again, it's not like real information, and some people don't disclose their red flags, and they work in the company like their whole life, not all whole life, but for a lot of years. And some people do disclose the red flags, and just because they disclosed a red flag doesn't mean that the person will don't do the job. So I mean, it's a strange situation. What do you think? Like,
I guess that's quite a difficult situation, because, well, you cannot be 100% honest when you are an HR, and also you cannot be 100% honest when you are a candidate. But and also when the situation in the market is like this, that well, there is a need for employees so high, then it changes a little bit. Well, the game changes a little bit, and probably the HRs, the companies might get disappointed somehow. But so there, I cannot imagine a situation when the position will be equal for the candidate and for the company.
So I thought that you can imagine it.
I guess even although this such situation might happen in reality, but it will last for a second, and then it will change again. So it will be very short, and we will not notice.
Okay, so when you're imagining an ideal situation that would take very little time, so is there, in your opinion, I'm just curious about your thought process, because I imagine that you face the same problems like in your team lead role. When you see a good candidate, you feel that it's a good fit, you give the offer, and the offer is declined. And the person says, oh, it was great, I liked everything, but I chose a different company. And you think, is he really honest? Is she telling the truth? And similarly, you see a candidate, oh, might be a good fit, but I'm not sure. This candidate is better. What should I do? And then you have to say no, but you don't know why you say no because your gut says that it's a no. And it's also a problem. So again, yeah, I understand it's a difficult problem, but maybe you have an ideal solution. Yeah.
I have been in a situation which you are talking about. You are talking from the HR perspective, but I was a team lead, and my team member came to me and said, well, I'm going to take another job offer, so I'm going to leave the company. And then what do I do then? So I tried to be as honest as possible. And what came from me that here is the situation that we really value your work, the way you work, and we would like to keep you in the company. So if you feel that there are some aspects which we could change to keep you in our organization, you have a chance to tell us, and we have a chance to try to meet them. And if you don't say anything, then we will lose you.
Yes.
And you might lose as well, because here you have a chance to say what are your goals and what you would like to reach in our company.
So
and it helps.
Okay, so, but okay, let me understand the situation better. So why does it happen so that people receive this? And I'm not saying that the person did not receive that in the beginning, but why people say that, okay, so I was working for 1 year or 2, I was not witnessed, I did not get proper feedback. And then after working for 2 years, manager says, and they value my work. What the fuck? I worked for 2 years, no thanks. Now suddenly I'm being valued and they are raising my salary. And for some people, it's a principle to decline such invitation because why didn't you tell me this long before that? And understand that I'm not talking about you, but for certain managers, I think due to high workload, due to their personal challenges, they are not, how to say, once again, honesty. They are not being honest with their team. They think that, okay, if there's no problem, I will not touch it. And then suddenly, if then there is a problem, they try to fix it. They start to giving good feedback, but then it's not working because the candidate is not. So it's great that in your situation that the person accepted that and the person stayed. But many times, people feel that, okay, if I stay, it will be up to a half a year and I will eventually still leave. And HRs oftentimes say that it will happen. If a person decided to leave, the person will leave eventually. On the other hand, maybe you can prepare for that. So maybe it's a rational decision. Okay. Yeah.
Well, there is one thing I would like to mention, because you talked about it, about this feedback, that only after some time the employee finds out that he's or she is valued.
Yeah.
I think that's there is a key point to take out, that the feedback for the employee is very important, and the positive feedback is much more important, I would say, when talking about the atmosphere in the team. So sometimes I feel that when we at our company, we collect feedback from our team from time to time, and it's just on the regular basis. So it seems like we get the feedback quite often, and we should get this feedback that someone likes how we work and they value our work.
Okay.
But still, it's not so easy to probably just to elaborate on this, that we somehow we are quite reserved when talking about the positive part, positive feedback. So we just mentioned that, well, everything is good, he works good, that's all. But when there is a risk of losing this employee, then we start elaborating more, we start explaining, and we start talking.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And of course, the feedback has to be balanced, and we shouldn't forget that we're in a culture that is more used to getting harsh criticism. So, for example, those who are born to parents who were raised in Soviet Union, many of us are used to getting more criticism and less positive feedback. And we get used to it, and we think that we only grow when we get criticism. And if we get positive ideas, and I noticed that, let's say, when I'm hired to give feedback after a, let's say, 360 assessment where data is collected into a report, and I have to give, let's say, feedback to a manager, and the feedback is like numbers based on the assessment, so their employees, their colleagues, and their manager. And oftentimes people feel strange when they receive positive feedback. They don't know what to do about it. And some people are skeptical, they start to deny it. Others are, let's say, very, how to say, shy, and they say, oh, it's not about me, it's about the team. The others, okay, they accept it, they enjoy it, but they don't do anything about that positive feedback. They don't realize that I'm not saying that to praise you. I'm saying that to encourage you to repeat that behavior. This is what people don't get sometimes, that it's a indication what you should keep doing in the future to be successful in this company. So yeah, there's a lot of, like, I think cultural somewhat things, somewhat personality related about accepting positive feedback. And I'm interested in your opinion, what can companies do? What can HRs do? What can managers do to increase the validity of positive feedback? In other words, how to make it as effective as possible, that it would not be taken only as a praise or just nice, sugary words.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one thing is to talk in the company, to talk about the feedback, about the importance of feedback, and positive and negative feedback as well. And when this theoretical information is flying around us, then we can catch the phrases and we get used to this, that okay, we get this positive feedback, what can I do with it? Also, I think it's nice to just to remind yourself that someone else might be also happy to hear the feedback from you.
What do you mean?
I mean that there are some, well, we talk about some employees who are working in some company, but also there is another part that we are the colleagues of those employees.
Yes.
So if we see some situation, we just don't think too much and give this positive feedback.
Immediate feedback at the point when, let's say, we see accepted behavior. Let's say we see that someone wrote a very constructive code review. We praise that person, but now the responsibility is on whom? On the one who wrote the code review, on someone who read that code review, on someone, let's say, as a manager, who should take the responsibility for giving that positive feedback. Oftentimes it is the manager who does that, usually on a one-on-one meeting or just in a regular chat, but who should take responsibility for that? I think that I would also add that sometimes people themselves are not looking for opportunities to get positive feedback. They just close to it. They are so sensitive to criticism that they lose their touch with balanced reality, that they are doing great things, they are communicative, they are sharing ideas, the ideas are accepted, they're doing maybe trainings, maybe they are, I don't know, good, have good leadership qualities, but they think that it's like obvious what they do. There's no need to, let's say, okay, so I'm just doing my job. So again, I see the importance of balance, of shared responsibility, but nevertheless, in this case, where should the balance go to more, the responsibility, I mean?
Well, I would say that everyone could feel this responsibility.
Okay.
I had the nice experience by myself when I did some presentation in the company, and I thought, well, it was not so good. And then afterwards, I received the feedback from my colleague who said, well, it was very nice to hear, and it was very nice that you've done this presentation, and it felt so good.
What
And
was the presentation about? Sorry.
well, the presentation was about, we in our company, we have OKR system
Okay.
when we raise our goals for the quarter, and the goals are personal and for the teams, and I presented our team goals for the whole company. So
okay, got it.
It just, the feedback which I received was from the colleague who is working in the team, and we don't communicate so much.
Oh.
So it was quite surprising that he noticed, but he noticed, and he was not considering if there is if he should give me a feedback or not, or just keep it to himself, but just wrote it. Probably there might be a chance that he was wondering, but still what felt that I got noticed, and this work of mine was noticed, and it felt very good.
Yeah, I mean, gratitude can do wonders, and I think that people should take more responsibility, and I think that the more we are grateful themselves, the more we say we just say thank you more often to our colleagues, to our managers as well, who are I mean, even right now there's so much negative emotions that they have to take in during their conversations with colleagues, a lot of anxiety, a lot of nervousness. So we should say thank you, I'm grateful for what you're doing, I appreciate for what you're doing. I mean, we should do that more often, and it seems that sometimes maybe engineers forget that they also have this responsibility, even ethical responsibility, because even speaking egoistically, it will work for you. I mean, better if you are more grateful, because if you're more grateful, others will be more grateful to you. It's just a very natural evolutionary process. So yeah, I totally agree.
And one more thing,
Yes.
I started thinking that I encourage giving the positive feedback, but there are some developers who I faced, and they don't like when I give them positive feedback.
Exactly.
So there is another problem.
Why don't they like it? How they explain it?
They are not used to it.
As
it
we
feels
said.
that it's normal what they have done, and they shouldn't be praised for it. So it feels like, well, sometimes that even saying thank you, that's too much.
Okay.
So everyone, they might have some different level of tolerance.
Yeah.
Probably. But still, I think that we should keep the atmosphere that positive feedback should be encouraged. And those colleagues who feel that it's too much or this positive feedback, well, they will get used to it. And then their level will be higher, and they will find encouragement in this positive feedback.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I mean, I guess it's a topic for maybe a different conversation, but I think there is a certain, there are very specific reasons why people and especially engineers, why they are so resistant to accept positive feedback. I think it's related to the upbringing. It is really related to what they are used to hear as children, their relationship to their parents, and it's a big topic. And I noticed that at least while working as a psychologist, that many engineers, they are actually not used to positive feedback in general. They're just they used to living in a somewhat competitive environment where you have to achieve something, to prove something, to be nice people, to be good engineers, and they feel that the only way to do that is to grow, and the only way to grow is to expand your knowledge and learn from your mistakes. But once again, as we discussed, what they don't realize is realizing what are you good at is as good as realizing what you're not good at. It can be even more informative. And I mean, I can imagine that for you to be in that position to try to work with these, how to say, defenses, I think it can be challenging because, I mean, you feel that you're doing a good thing, but the person is denying it. Do you get this
It
feeling?
feels like it.
Okay.
Sometimes I feel like this, but still, at first it can be confusing because, well, it shocked me a little bit, and I was thinking, well, how could I deal then? Should I change my way of communicating, or should I keep it the same? But then after analyzing, after thinking about those colleagues, well, I just got to the conclusion that it's still important for me to keep this positive feedback.
Yeah.
And I want it to be around me.
And it's also a good thing that if you want to ensure that, to realize that a strategy is working, you have to keep doing it for a while. You cannot just do 1-2 positive feedback sessions and realize that it's not working and throw it away. You have to be consistent. And as you said, after time to time, people will get used to it and they will appreciate it and they will use it to their benefit. And I think it's good for managers to explain to their employees why they are giving that positive feedback, that it's not for manipulation, it's for actual growth. And sometimes maybe people miss that. So, okay, speaking of managers' experience, we smoothly moved to this topic. And what I'm interested in is, and once again, to go back to the tense situation right now, once again, due to a war in Ukraine. I mean, I noticed that here in Lithuania, managers are facing a difficult time because people are bringing these anxieties, bringing these tensions to work. They pop up in meetings, they pop up in one-on-one meetings, in group meetings, in general casual meetings. And I think that I don't have proper research at my hand, but I think in the past 3 weeks, the concentration reduced. At least this is what I see from certain clients who are working in engineering. I mean, coding, I can't imagine, is a concentration heavy job, but when you're thinking about atomic war or nuclear war, it becomes even more difficult to concentrate. So what would be your advice to other team leaders who are like lower grade leaders, meaning that they are engineers are reporting to them? It's a different situation when a manager has managers in the reporting chain, but when you have like people who are doing their specialist jobs, what would be your advice to managers, how they could cope with their people's anxieties, but also their own anxieties and their own responsibility?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the key strategy is to keep talking, to talk. And after having these anxieties out of yourself, sharing with someone, it's possible to move to another stage when we can search for some coping strategies. We talked about some coping strategies in the beginning, and without talking about the emotions, about the stress and anxiety, well, it's difficult to start going to the coping strategies Because if we let's say you come to me and tell me that, well, I feel anxiety because of the war, and I start right away, okay, so then you have to limit yourself to the information about the war and keep focusing on the activities. Well, it feels that I did not understand you.
Yeah. Look, but
And
Renata, I will stop you a bit. I totally understand what you're getting at. And when I'm trying to empathize with a team leader, so I feel, okay, so I hear a team leader saying, so what, do you expect me now to become a psychiatrist or psychologist? Because, so I learned to do that for about 6 years. You learned that to do that for more than 10 years, if I'm correct. So you have a training, and even having that training, it's not very easy. Okay, some people have training after working in emergency lines like jaunimo linija or sidabrinė linija, those more popular in Lithuania. But so it's great if you had that training, but if you don't, so after having at least 3 such conversations for about an hour or so on a day, it can drain you totally. And if you're not used to that, if you're used to more, how to say, more formal conversations, work related, it can be a bummer. I mean, it can make you feel worse yourself. And I understand you will say, okay, so go to a specialist. But for a manager, for some people to acknowledge the fact that I need help, I mean, it's difficult. So what would you recommend? Okay, so yeah, speak to your people, try to hear them out, try to encourage them to speak as openly as possible. That's great, but what about the manager or team leader? What the person can do about one's well-being? I mean, you're a team leader, so maybe
yes.
you have some personal experience to share.
Mhm. Well, I started laughing because, well, the first thought which came to my head that, well, there is a chain. So you have a team lead of yourself, you have a family, you have some friends. So don't be afraid to share
Mhm.
your thoughts and share your worries, because, well, we feel the same. We all feel some level of anxiety and
Mm.
stress. And it's useful to start talking.
What
Don't
about
keep everything to yourself.
what about being honest? Again, we talked about honesty in interviewing process. What about being honest and telling your team members that are reporting to you? I mean, it's a worst word, I know, reporting, but nevertheless, that are, your team members. What about also telling themselves that, okay, I'm also scared. I'm also facing these dilemmas, and we're on the same boat. And I'm not the wisest person in the world. I will not tell you what to do, but we are in this together, and let's help each other out. I think that it takes courage to do that, but for many managers, it means that, okay, so now I'm putting myself in the weaker position, or what are you, Povilas, recommending to me? So is it a solution? Is it a viable one? Is it realistic to expect managers to do that? What do you think?
I think there are some managers who can do like this, can say like this,
Mm.
and they already keep this communication. Well, our company is quite flat, so we don't have many managers on top of us. And it feels that we are closer to each other,
Mm.
closer. Just there are no formal boundaries for us to keep the, well, to keep some way of well, just to keep ourselves, our inner self, and then a
Mm-hmm.
picture of ourselves which we think is perfect in such position. And we are not humans, we don't feel something. But I think, well, everyone has uh, emotions, and
Mm.
it's legal to share them, despite the fact that, well, he is my team member, he or
Yeah.
she is
Yeah.
my team member, but still. it's good to share those thoughts.
So you feel that at least some managers who had that courage, they should be encouraged to be open to their team members and don't pretend that they are not having similar or same fears. And
I get it builds the team better. Well, the team members are becoming closer to each other and to the team lead as well, because there are some similarities among them. Maybe you have some better suggestions.
No, I'm just, I'm
you
going with the
are
flow.
working more with such clients who might be experiencing these thoughts.
It's strange because when I'm working as a psychologist, many people tell me things that they would even tell to their closest people, like their partners or wives or husbands. And of course, it's a privileged position and there's a lot of responsibility in terms of confidentiality, but I'm just trying to figure out what I'm doing different that people can share such things. And I think the key thing is that I'm not like tied to that person's life. I'm just someone who they come to one time a week, and they trust that this will be kept private and that what they say will be understood, it will be accepted, and they will just get from sharing maybe some good insights. So Carl Rogers, one of my favorite psychotherapists, he had a vision that if, let's say, people would be open about their own feelings, about their own insecurities, they would be, as he would say, congruent. If people, so one thing, the other thing, if people would be empathetic, they would try to understand the person from their perspective as much as they can. And third, they would, how to say, they would regard that person as a lovable individual. It would reduce the need for us as psychologists, as psychiatrists, because people would face a human and not a persona, let's say. And I'm trying myself in those counseling situations to be open as well and acknowledge that I'm also not perfect. But once again, we are meeting only one time a week. And a system in an organization is much more complicated. You are not like two people in a room. There's a whole organization with different ethical standards, different levels of openness. And I can imagine that for some people, it's what I'm saying is just too idealistic. I will not tell this my manager. I will not tell this my colleague, and they're just keeping it to themselves and not to their benefit, I guess. Those who tell it, they might suffer as well, because it can spread like gossip and it can harm their career. So yeah, I'm glad you asked this question, but as you, I don't have one answer, because I'm not working in that system. I left corporate world to avoid these complicated situations where your life depends too much on many people. And I just didn't like that aspect of working in the corporate world. But yeah, and I made risks. And sometimes when I opened up to my manager, the manager would use it not to my benefit. I once said that I had psychological problems. And when we were discussing a work issue, the person said, that the manager said, oh, so maybe this is your depression or blah, blah, blah. Like a criticism. So I can imagine that some people might fear such situations and they don't want to harm their career. So maybe you have any thoughts about that. Once again, we're talking about dilemmas. So share or not to share. It can help me, but it can hurt me. What people can do about it. What do you think?
I think it's important to understand as much as possible, to understand about your inner worries regarding the situation, to understand your reasons to act somehow. or not to act somehow, and then to wait what is better, to keep everything to myself and not say, or to say and deal with the result.
It's a rational
So
decision, what you're saying, but in these situations, it's not brain or rationality that's working. It's the fear of being not accepted, of being declined, of being rejected. And when
yes.
you're in these situations, the fear of being not accepted, usually it's very strong. So it's difficult to keep doing that rational process.
But what I meant that well, what I would suggest
Okay.
to explore your emotions and the reason behind these emotions, because it's not difficult to have rational thinking in the situation which is low in the emotional tense. It's not
Yeah.
tense. So you just think about these key points, and then it's easy to understand everything. But what is sometimes much more important to understand your own emotions and why these emotions comes in such
Okay, so
situation.
to stop you briefly, the person says good and bad. I either feel good or I ever feel bad. So there are two emotions. So where to go from here? No, I'm serious. I mean,
Okay.
for some people,
Yes.
emotional literacy is not what they are used to. So
I totally get what you are saying, and I was in such position some time ago as well, and all the medical background, all the psychiatry and psychotherapy learning helped me to find the ways which are good for me to explore my own emotions and the reasons behind those emotions, and it helps me now in everyday life.
yeah,
For example, let's say I used to be I used to be a good girl from a
you're
very
not
long
anymore.
time. Well, I neither good nor bad, but as you say, there is good or bad. So there are two very
Yeah,
extreme feelings, but there is something in between. There
exactly.
is
Yeah.
some gray shadows between white and black,
Yes.
and we can explore what moves us 1% more to the one side or 1% more to the other side. And when we explore ourselves, it's easier to understand what's in between those two very radical feelings. So all this part of my life, when I was learning psychiatry, I was getting the knowledge of mental health and psychotherapy, I guess it helped me to plan my life the way I want to live, more closer to that ideal picture
Okay.
than what I used to live before.
Yeah, I mean, totally makes sense. I mean, of course, I'm not trying to rephrase badly your words, but we can say, okay, study psychiatry, psychology for 6 years and you'll be fine. But of course, what I'm taking from what you said is that educating yourself is what's important. And you don't have to study, let's say, a degree to understand your emotions. There are a lot of Udemy courses, Coursera courses about emotional intelligence. And it sometimes can just take 1 hour or two educating yourself about how to identify different emotional states, to differentiate between, I mean, depressive thoughts and anxious thoughts, and it will be already a progress. I mean, what is great about developers that they are super good at one thing, which is Googling. I mean, they are good at many things, but Googling is, I guess, one of the key competences. So, I mean, there's so much good resources. And I realized that by saying that there are certain topics that I realize I maybe should learn. Maybe that's software development, but coding is so far from my humanitarian humanities background, is that I feel that lack of inner motivation to do that. And I realized that for people who are used to learning more practical, more engineering related stuff like programming, hardware, software, robotics, whatever, these kind of things, they're so far away and also so not interesting that to find that inner motivation, like to take that course, it takes a lot of leaps and bounds. So I understand that our time is running out, but nevertheless, if shortly you could provide just maybe some tips, what can people do to overcome that inner obstacle to learn about emotional intelligence, learn about psychology or mental health in general?
I guess the arsenal is very broad, and it's even too difficult to mention everything. But I guess when I'm thinking about the situation, when is the motivation in the highest level, in the very peak, is when we feel the need. So if we feel that we don't like something, we would prefer to have something different, then we should search, and we should search for opportunities to change it and to understand it if we don't understand. So Googling is full of tips, but I would say that it depends on people. I know already quite a few self-help apps there are which helps.
Like what, learning. For example, maybe you could give examples of those apps.
Okay, just one of the few, Mindletic.
Okay.
Let's say there is an app, Ramu, Pause in Lithuanian.
And these are Lithuanian apps, actually. These are Lithuanian projects. Yeah.
Yes, that's Lithuanian projects. They were, some of my previous colleagues took part in these projects, and they are quite nice, and it's easy for people to get these apps, and they can find some useful information and some useful help.
Yeah, so shout out to
also
Mindletic.
there are
yeah, because I'm working over there as a psychologist, so let's acknowledge that. Yeah.
Yes, so it can be helpful. So there are just many options. People can go straight to a psychologist, coaches, consultants, some self-help support groups. Let's say for men, there is Gentis self-help group, which is very nice because, well, they are raising those topics about mental health for men. And for women, there are also other self-help groups. So you just have to search in what is the most acceptable for you.
Yeah, that's great, because the social aspect of these groups like Gentis is very great, because you tend to meet other people who are in a similar situation. And the fact that you're belonging to some group that understands you is what becomes that motivator. And I know a lot of men who had their own that tribe, or how they say in Gentis, and they start to realize that what was missing. What was missing was honesty, oftentimes what we already discussed, and they get that honesty by talking openly about their feelings, about their needs, sometimes being aggressive in a constructive way, sometimes being emotional in a very open way. So yeah, it's a great platform. So I also shout out to Antanas. So I guess I will have to invite him one day as well. Okay, Renata, so thanks for these tips. Thanks for your insights. Thanks for your background. I feel that to have someone like you in your organization is, I mean, it's a privilege because, as I said, there are very little people who are mental health professionals, but they are also software developers. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to talk about your journey into software development, but the fact that you can switch between these different hats, I think it makes you a very strong asset to a company. And I guess maybe we will leave this for another conversation because I think that your journey is very interesting as well. But to end this, maybe you have, I don't know, just something you would like to people take from this as a final note. Maybe you want to, I don't know, how to palinkėti. What's in English? I mean, to Lithuanians don't know.
I lost these words.
Anyway, so, but you got the meaning, just to say something to our audience.
Mm-hmm. Well, probably the whole journey of my career, changes afterwards. That, well, in short, I was working as a psychiatrist for a while. I was learning to be a psychiatrist. And after becoming a psychiatrist, I realized that I want to, well, that's not totally a good fit for me. So I changed my career to software development, and it brought a lot of fears and a lot of difficult situations. So what I got from these changes, that despite all the obstacles, there are still solutions. And what helped me a lot is talking to people, communicating, raising my thoughts, raising my worries, being vulnerable, I would say, but being scared at the same time, but still trying to do. And what surprised me, that well, it was successful story, turned out to be a successful story.
Yes.
So I would like to encourage everyone who have some thoughts that, well, there is something they don't like, that it's possible you can change something about it. And there might be that you will change a situation, a place, or you will change your views on the situation, and it will be encouraging and valuable. So what I learned and still want to say for everyone, that, well, keep trying and you will succeed. In some way, you will reach this success.
Yeah, so never give up. Very, very inspiring, Renata. Thank you. Okay, so thanks for your time, and see you next time, right?
Yes, of course. It was very nice to be here with you.
Thank you.